Good morning and good afternoon. People watching this later won't know that we've stretched the limits of time zone pain to have Nathan McCauley all the way from the West Coast early on a Friday morning, and Justin and Daniel in the UK hanging on to their late Friday afternoon for us. But thanks for joining. This is a virtual roundtable on container security, the first of what we hope will be many developer conversations around topics of interest. So without further ado, I think I'll let each of you kind of tell us who you are, what you do, and kind of why you're in the container space, what's of interest to you and what you're working on. So Daniel, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure thing. So my name is Daniel Bryant, working for a company called Open Credo over here in the UK. We work globally. We're a consultancy software delivery company. So at the moment, a lot of our clients come to us saying we want containers, we want cloud, we want microservices, and we want them yesterday. So that's pretty much where my interest there lies. Definitely very much my sort of background has been like web dev to like full stack, as they call it. I don't know if I like the term full stack, but with a lot of Java stuff. And over the years, got more and more interested in the operations side, the sysadmin side. When Docker came out, I was like, this is awesome. Like, and kind of jumped on Docker, obviously, and then CoreOS kind of stuff came along. So we've done quite a few deployments in the last couple of years. A lot of work with Docker, a lot of work with Mesos, increasingly a lot of work with Kubernetes now, and kind of making sure that customers kind of know how this new tech works, both from a functional point of view, but also from a non-functional point of view, so that hence security is a big part of that.
Yep. Great. All right, thanks, Daniel. Justin.
Hi, I'm Justin Cormack. I work at Docker in the Cambridge, UK office. I'm a maintainer on Docker Engine, among other things, and I work on some of the security issues with Docker Engine. I also have a general interest in security. I was a sysadmin for a long time, and I'm a developer, and I kind of cross the sort of DevOps divide, and I'm really interested in how we bring security to developers who aren't so expert on things.
Yeah, great. All right, thanks. Nathan, good morning.
Yeah. So I'm Nathan. I'm the director of security over at Docker. So kind of been here for about a year and a half, and kind of joined Docker and gotten involved in containers when I felt like the company I'd been working at previously had a bunch of hard-fought wins about microservices and about the right way to do X, Y, and Z. This was about 4 years ago we started that, and then basically I felt like I had all these like understandings about how things should be done, like actually 7 intuitions about like, okay, this is the right way to do this, this is the right way to do this, this is the right way to do this. And I saw Docker, and it perfectly embodied all of them. And so it just felt like, oh my gosh, this is the right thing for this problem. And in particular, getting to help build security into that platform so that everyone who's benefiting from the Docker project will get security out of the box. It felt like an opportunity that couldn't be passed up.
Yeah. All right, great. And I guess for those who may watch this later, I'll introduce myself. I guess I'm playing the role of host today, but more a facilitator and participant as well. I work for IBM's cloud division in the Open Technologies group, which is actively involved in open source projects, particularly, in my case, working upstream in the Docker community, Docker engine maintainer like Justin, and also trying to help IBM as we determine kind of a container strategy and path in the ecosystem for our own public cloud, Bluemix, and what we do with containers there. And like all of you have said, I mean, it's definitely been an interesting space, and customers want it and want to know what to do. And obviously, security is one of the key things that customers care about. So, as you all know, the topic has tons of blog posts and speakers at conferences and everything in between. So hopefully we can add some to that discussion today and see what a value we can discuss. So I guess first off, and I'll leave these open-ended. I don't think we need to kind of go around the room every time, but definitely be interesting from your perspectives on what you see as security challenges that are maybe unique to the container space that haven't existed for other either virtualization technologies or application deployment technologies in the past.
Shall I step in first, guys? Now, so I think one of the biggest things I'm seeing is kind of just in so the favourite word of mine, DevOps. So we're seeing people like developers who traditionally haven't been exposed to operational aspects. Suddenly, with the power and flexibility of Docker, that it's seriously awesome. You can spin up anything you want kind of within seconds. But there comes with great power comes great responsibility. I think one of the biggest challenges I see kind of on the streets, so to speak, when I work with clients, is the understanding of things. Suddenly there's a larger attack surface. You're potentially bundling massive kind of operating systems in with your image if you're not careful, and kind of either leaving default configurations in terms of security or not understanding some of the issues like namespaces, user namespaces, not understanding things like MAC, mandatory access control, that kind of stuff. I think one of the biggest things I'm seeing is kind of the education piece. If developers are coming on to what's traditionally been an operators or sysadmins kind of area, suddenly there's a lot more stuff to learn. Don't know if you guys are seeing that as well, or
yeah, definitely. I think also they've had little experience in kind of communicating about security issues between developers and operations people, because it's normally been quite a siloed thing.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of the DevOps movement, kind of integrating dev and ops into a single workflow rather than having them be siloed. So playing off of that, one of the issues I'm seeing is that like organizational shift where many security teams had one idea about how they would do a security process, and then once they start understanding like, our company is going to containers plus DevOps in order to be able to move quickly, how do we get the same kinds of controls that we want in what ends up being an automated CI/CD process? And so they're looking for ways to automate processes that may have been particularly required a manual sign-off or manual review at some stages of the pipeline.
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a lot of work actually around CI and CD, not to jump the gate there, but it's a real challenge. So I think a lot of the traditional development point of view, the kind of particularly with the build pipeline, was to get the functional stuff tested. As I mentioned already, people are kind of like, yes, we're doing BDD to kind of say given when then in terms of application, but there's no kind of sort of related thing for security. I think, and that's that people are trying to move so fast these days. It's so easy to, I've mentioned already, but it's so easy to forget non-functional. Unless, like you said, then Nathan, building it into the pipeline, it just gets forgotten if you're not careful.
Yeah. So those are all good thoughts. I think one additional thing to step back to kind of the lower layer. It's also interesting. Even talks I've given just kind of covering the basics of the namespaces that make up a container. I mean, those are all concepts that, to many of us, especially those of us that work on Docker or other container engines, these are kind of old hat and we just assume everyone understands them. But in many cases, these are new topics to definitely application developers and sometimes operators as well, kind of even what a container is made of, what are the isolation primitives that we even call a container. So yeah, I think education, like one of you said, is part of the whole deal of what we're trying to do to really educate developers and operators and even those kind of operating these environments to kind of understand what their options are for security, how to talk about what's available and configuration options and all those sorts of things. So definitely, I guess that's my kind of eye-opening detail after 2 years working on containers is what seems old hat to me is brand new to many people still.
I think, yeah, and also, I mean, as Daniel says, people aren't used to continuous testing for security issues at all, and they don't, they see that their tests pass and they think that that's fine, but actually they haven't tested for any security issues, so a lot of the time they're missing out, and then there are people who have shipped things with big security holes because they're not doing basic security testing as part of their build pipeline.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. So maybe segueing from that to potentially some more specifics. Daniel, it seems like you're working directly with customers. I'm sure Nathan maybe hears from customers in his role. What are the significant threats that are out there today, and how are IT shops, handling these? What are the tools available? What are they doing? Kind of what are you seeing as sort of state of the art right now?
Yeah, so from my perspective, customers in some ways are getting more aware of security stuff now with the whole DevOps, DevOpsSec, or what we're going to call it, the latest kind of buzzword is. People are getting more aware, but still, it's like kind of a defense in depth type thing. Yeah, you need to it's security all the way down. So we're actually working with customers a lot in terms of helping them understand security like throughout the stack, like right from application and now down to containers. So again, a lot of like basic stuff isn't covered, as Justin kind of hinted, within build pipelines. We see even like injection attacks, SQL injection attacks on websites, still being available on certain. Obviously, won't name any names, but on certain applications, and sort of exploits that are in the application level that allow you to do kind of quite evil things and so forth. So it's kind of giving people a basic and deep understanding of security throughout the stack. And what we're finding now is people that are worried in sort of the container space are often looking for products, or looking for external experts. So we're seeing particularly consultancies based around security, like OS level and container and hardware level security. That's what they do. They're specialists in that. And we're seeing products like Twistlock, that kind of stuff. I think it was DockerCon maybe last year I went to, and there was a whole bunch in the expo hall, whole bunch of just security-focused products for Docker. And I think people are coming to the realization that this stuff's complicated, so I'd rather defer to an expert or a product. So I think we'll see more and more of those kind of put into the build pipelines, put into the actual deployments now, and sort of bake security in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. I'm seeing a trend at customers to it's kind of on the other end of the understanding stack from where Daniel is seeing them. Some of them are saying, okay, look, tell me the basics. Help me understand the basics of what's going on here. And then other folks are saying, okay, I get the basics. Now I'm interested in hearing what Docker and what others have to say about security of orchestration systems. So taking it up one level and thinking, okay, great, I understand containment. I'm comfortable with this. What are we doing about having a whole cluster of machines working together? How do we get the same kinds of security by default that we have in containerization and apply that to clusters? And so they're looking for solutions around in that area and asking the questions about okay, what can worker nodes do? What can manager nodes do? Things like that. And then the other trend that you're seeing a little bit is on the security vendor side, because Daniel mentioned a little bit about that. Some security vendors, and I think the ones that really get it around containers, are recasting normal problems in light of the difference containerization makes. And there's some interesting things that are going on there in terms of taking different approaches to security problems that are kind of container native or container aware.
Yeah, yep, that makes sense. So we've talked a little bit about the ecosystem and kind of what people are interested in. Maybe we can spend a few minutes talking about actual resources that are available. So this could be, like we've just talked about, some vendors like Twistlock. What do you see as kind of the tools being made available? And obviously Docker has some, the ecosystem is offering some of the public cloud, container cloud as a service options are offering resources in this area. Kind of what do you see people gravitating toward as far as either products or even some of the features we've added to the engine in the last 6 to 12 months? So Justin obviously has been involved in some of the SecComp work. So yeah, what are some of the resources available, whether they're part of the engine, part of ecosystem tools that you see people gravitating toward, or how are they using them today?
Yeah, I think there's a few of them. I'll let Justin talk about any kind of like engine level features since he's the expert on those. But one simple one that Docker actually released is this tool called Docker Bench, which is basically it's this pretty simple idea. There's a set of recommendations from the sys benchmark folks. There's a benchmark for Docker 111. Basically, how do you properly configure your host to run Docker? And unfortunately, it's about a 150-page document that is, for most people, it's pretty boring. I mean, maybe for those of us on the call, we're interested in it, but most people aren't that interested and just kind of want like a checklist. So what Docker Bench does is it spins up and runs as a container. Surprise, surprise. Spins up and checks your host configuration against that set of best practices, and then gives you kind of like a bullet by bullet to-do list on things you need to do. And that's everything from, hey, you should enable AppArmor or SE Linux to you should enable authentication on your Docker daemon socket. So pretty simple stuff, a simple utility, but really helps you on the kind of the first step of securing a Docker host, which is securing the host configuration.
Yep.
I mean, I think with the engine, we've tried to make the defaults give you a good amount of security to start with, because that way people don't have to read a 150-page document before they get security, and that's been really important. There are still things that people can do in addition, because there are some things that are still not the default. I mean, user namespaces, for example, are something that Phil did the work for, which is being very modest and not mentioning. But those are not enabled by default yet, and there are a few little issues still in the way of having that as an easy default for everyone, but we're getting much closer to it. But so there's still a checklist of things that you can do to deprivilege your containers and so on, which are not in the default set. But a lot of the work we've been doing is really been invisible to users and just adding defaults that just work. So that's kind of been that's been a big focus, because optional security is stuff that people won't use a lot of the time.
Right. Yeah, and I brought that up. Justin was there, but I had the chance to speak at the Docker London meetup last month, and I actually showed that chart that is in another very long document. I'm totally losing his last name, but Aaron G, I'll call him.
Gratifiore.
Gratifiore, yeah.
Yeah.
Good document. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the NCIS hardening Linux containers document, which is a great resource if you do have lots of time and
Yeah.
are willing to dig through it. It's got great information, but he has a chart in there with the security by default, which I think, as Justin said, I mean, that's, we know that developers are looking for the quickest way to get up and running, and so if it's not on, will they take the time to understand the options and turn it on? History tells us no. So comparing LXC, Rocket, Docker with kind of what are secure options that are there by default. Kind of forget what he has, kind of a medium, complete, etc. But yeah, it's funny. I posted those charts online, and that particular slide is like the most copied slide of the whole deck. So people are very interested in what do I get out of the box, and so obviously there are other engines out there, but I think I definitely, as a non-Docker employee, am willing to say I think they've worked hard to create an environment where trying to get the most security out of the box for the end user, so that that's not something that gets lost in the details of getting set up and getting running.
It's also a lot more security than you get by not using containers. I mean, I think that people often don't realize is that if you just run applications on a host, you don't get any of this.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's definitely a very important point, and I've brought up that that may be kind of the source behind the statement from the DockerCon stage by a very large enterprise that they came to containers for security, not in spite of security. ADP, the CTO at ADP mentioned that, and I think that's a good point that I think many people miss, is that even if I've got my VM isolation, if I'm running a bunch of applications, I most likely, unless I've spent a lot of time, have not created an AppArmor profile for that application. I haven't created seccomp rules, etc. So yeah, very good point. And we've the one thing I will say about user namespaces is that our IBM public cloud, they sort of made that a requirement of go live. So we are using user namespaces in our Bluemix container service, as well as many of the other features, and we have IBM security researchers who've been digging into all these areas, seccomp, AppArmor, to try and create a best security by default situation for people that come and use containers in that space, and I'm sure many others are doing that. Any other thoughts on that?
I'll just chuck a recommendation of a tool in there, Phil. As in, I only stumbled across it recently, but it got me thinking with something you said there. I don't know if you guys heard of it. It's called Gauntlet, like Gaunt LT. And it's like you can write cucumber Gherkin syntax for assertions of security things on even like seccomp stuff. I think you can. I haven't played with it enough yet, but as in, kind of, we mentioned it a few times. Like, I totally agree with being a developer. I think I can say this. Sometimes we do take the quickest route because the management's kind of saying, get the feature out there, yeah. And trying to explain to someone about user namespaces, they're going to be like, what? Just get it out there. So I think it's not only like educating developers and getting them to, excuse me, they have same defaults, but also kind of baking it into the pipeline. So I'll keep banging that drum, but I really think it's important to have things that kind of test along the way, kind of gateways to say, this is good to go in production. I think it's much easier to say to management, oh, look, this feature hasn't passed this test in the pipeline, than it is to try and explain things. So I've been using things like BDD security and Z attack proxy, that kind of stuff, for weaving in more application level security. But I read this O'Reilly book, a DevOps Sec, and it recommended Gauntlet for making assertions actually at the OS level, which I thought was quite cool. I don't know if you guys have had a play with it, or I haven't fully yet. But
yeah, interesting. I haven't heard of it, but sounds like an interesting tool to look at.
Yeah. I haven't looked at it, but I'll take a look at it after this. Just kind of one thing to piggyback there on the idea of having security checks as part of the CI/CD pipeline. There's a kind of a project that we've been working on at Docker for quite some time called Docker Content Trust, which is about signing and verification of images. And it's got a lot of features. You can kind of dig into it for a long time, but one of the coolest ones it has is this notion of threshold signing, so that you can say, in order to, say, deploy to production, I need to have X, Y, and Z signatures. You can do like N out of K, or just say like, okay, I need this signer, and this signer, and this signer before I'll allow this into production. So what we're seeing a lot of organizations get excited about is taking all of those checks that they do during their CI pipeline and actually having them sign the container image, such that there's a cryptographic attestation that a container went through all of those phases. And so that when in production, you can actually cryptographically verify that the CI system passed, that the security scanner passed, that the vulnerability check passed, and that it went through staging before coming into production. So for folks that are wanting that kind of pretty rigorous set of guarantees on whether something went through the phases of the build process, we're seeing some pretty interesting applications of Docker Content Trust there.
Yeah, interesting. Speaking of Docker Content Trust, I mean, maybe just because I haven't had a chance to look for the past release. At some point, I assume, or maybe this has already happened. So maybe just a quick update on where that is related to sort of on by default, or what's the state of official images, or
Yep. Yeah. So all of the I guess to set some background for Phil's question, Docker Content Trust is the signing and verification system. It's integrated into the Docker CLI, so you can enable it through an environment variable and then get cryptographic verification of any of your containers. And it's kind of default integrated into push and pull when you turn on that environment variable. The next phase that we want to get to is kind of a staged rollout within the community where pull can be trusted by default, and then eventually get to the point where push can be involved in signing as well. So the first phase of that is we have all the official images signed right now, and we actually have all these images signed that are in the Docker store as well, which is kind of another area where you'll be able to get content from the Docker Hub. So the first and easiest phase is just going to be able to get, whenever you pull an official image, verify its signature, and then learning from that process, testing it out there, making sure that the whole ecosystem is able to use that. We'll start aggressively moving towards being able to enable it more across the board. Biggest thing being that we can't at all affect the user experience. So the ideal goal is that there's no user level interaction that has to happen there, and there's a lot of stuff about like client key management that we still aren't comfortable that we worked out all the kinks yet in terms of key sharing across multiple hosts for the signing keys. So we want to make sure we get all that stuff worked out really well before kind of enabling it broadly for the whole community.
Okay, yeah, great. Thanks for that update.
Nathan also briefly mentioned image scanning, which is also something that Docker has a product for as part of Docker Data Center, and there are other products available now, and that's something that people are starting to really appreciate. I mean, I think it, when they turn it on, and you just get a message saying your image that you've got on Docker Hub has security vulnerabilities. It's really it's the most proactive security emails that I've had for a very long time. It's actually a problem with your stuff. Let's do you want to do something about it, or do you want to ignore it? Yeah, I think I'll do something about that.
Yeah, definitely. I've been very happy with the reception to the security scanners within the community, both ours and some others. I think there's an opportunity for them to work very well together and kind of carve out different levels of the stack, because ideally security scanning should go all the way from like high-level application frameworks like Java, Ruby, Node, all the way down to like system components. And from my point of view, as having I feel kind of responsible for the changes that Docker is making in the world. From our point of view, we created this massive static linker. If you squint at Docker just right, it looks like a massive static linker, which in the first place made it harder to scan for vulnerabilities. So I almost felt like it was a moral imperative for us to release a scanner because we had made that certain aspect worse. Now it turns out that it seems like we've gone beyond what was available before and kind of being proactive on the hub. But just kind of a historical note on why we did it. I felt like it was morally reprehensible not to. So.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean that's definitely become a hot area for a lot of activity from IBM as a vulnerability advisor plugged into our container cloud. And I just read a blog post from one of our researchers. I don't know how it will kind of appear in product form or how it'll get plugged in, but also this concept of going beyond sort of statically, I looked at your image and here are your vulnerabilities or things you haven't patched. but even live assessment of a running container, once, and again, in our container as a service type architecture, this is possible because the hosts are being managed by us. But to look at your container and say, hey, I don't know if you know this, but you've got code running here that's trying to exploit this capability, or so that's kind of maybe a future area of research, but that sounds kind of interesting as far as live.
Yeah.
As a neutral person here, guys, can I check in the Core OS work? It's been pretty cool. Have you guys been following the you mentioned there, Nathan, about sort of like the entire kind of stack? I saw a talk. I can't remember what it was at a Core OS meetup, and they're talking about even using like TPMs to verify the hardware layer, and then going right up through the container, through say Kubernetes of their choice, right up through the application. These kind of things, signing all the way, all this kind of stuff. And I really like that idea of being able to trust everything. You know what I mean? It's very easy to trust one area, but you've got to really have the whole stack trusted, haven't you? So I've got to shout out the Core OS people. I think they're, I'm neutral here, but I think they're doing some pretty cool work.
Yep. Yeah, that's another area. IBM, our Linux Technology Center has been very active in the TPM and the IMM, the measurement aspect of that in the Linux kernel. So definitely, I know in our kind of big iron end of things, that trusted stack idea from hardware all the way up is definitely
from building the hardware as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it feels like someone like IBM has a good opportunity there. In terms of trusted boot all the way up from like individual components. I think there's a long road ahead if we're trying to trust our hardware, because so TPM attestation gets you to kind of like, okay, I know that the TPM is good, but the attacker model for hardware attestation is I don't trust my hardware vendor. And so you really need attestation of every single component of the hardware, including like the disk drives, the CPU, just everything that comes shipped by the hardware vendor. So someone like IBM, they can trust themselves, and that kind of makes sense. But there's going to be a very long road to a useful increment there on the hardware attestation. Worth doing. It's just I think it's pretty far out. Another thing to go back on what Phil was saying about kind of scanning running containers. I think this is a huge area, and actually in basically anyone who's trying to do a Docker security startup comes and talks to us, and I say, please go solve this because it's a huge opportunity. And I think the opportunity is a really good host-based intrusion detection system. The fundamental shift that we see with containers is you have a container that does one thing and continues to do that all the time, whereas a VM or a host operating system would kind of go across the board and have system daemons plus the application code. So it's very hard to develop a known good baseline of what does this thing do if it's a VM or a host. But developing a baseline for what this thing does when it's a container is very easy, and deviations from that norm should always be signal. So I'm very much looking forward to. I'm not ready to endorse any of them because I haven't seen one that I'm like think meets the mark just yet. But an intrusion detection system based on deviation from the norm for containers, it's going to be high signal, and it's going to be a big deal for security. So I'm very much looking forward to folks working on that. Glad to hear that some folks at IBM are thinking about that too, as well as the kind of the startup ecosystem around Docker.
Yeah, like you said, I think that's definitely a very interesting area, and it's interesting to consider in that sense that the whole microservices push may kind of enables that to know, okay, this piece only does this, and when it doesn't do that, I should get worried.
It also makes, I mean, that also is something that makes understanding what security to grant, what access to grant services so much easier than big monolithic things, because it becomes something that you can describe in a in a short manifest that this service is only supposed to be doing these 4 things, talking on this, listening on this port with an encrypted service that should always be encrypted, and various other, and talking to this storage, and that's it. And it shouldn't ever be doing anything else. Where it was actually very hard to do that before microservices, because services were just doing programs were just doing so many different things.
Yep.
If we can make it comprehensible, then it makes it so much easier for just to communicate between devs and ops, and to set the right settings, and understand when something's doing something it's not supposed to be doing.
On that note, Justin, I definitely do a shout out again to Aaron Gratafiore. Did a great black belt talk at DockerCon last couple of months ago now in Seattle. It's online. I think even the video is online. Actually, I tweeted it the other day, so the video is definitely online. And it was like a whirlwind tour, 120 slides in 60 minutes or whatever. But he talked everything from like user namespace, seccomp to microservices, pretty much echoing what you were saying there, Justin, in terms of like microservices, single responsibility, kind of instrument them more and lock them down, but it makes security more complex at the higher level, if that makes sense. But it's just a wicked talk. It's 60 minutes of your life you are going to not regret spending watching that video. Like, if you're into any kind of containers or microservices, it's like, I tweeted, it's mandatory watching, yeah.
Yeah, actually, based on your tweet, I took time to finally watch it. I was.
Cool.
You would think at DockerCon I would have actually been there, but somehow speaking and doing other things, I missed so many good talks. Yeah, thanks for reminding me about that. So before we belabor folks to death who might come along and watch this, maybe it feels like we've kind of transitioned naturally to kind of some future topics. So maybe we can wrap up. Where do you see security heading, Daniel? Maybe from your perspective, what are clients looking for? As they understand the basics, what do they sort of perceive they need next, or what do you perceive should come next? So open topic for anybody.
It's an interesting one. So I think I'll prime it with one thing I've been seeing, and I don't know too much about it yet, but it's definitely caught my interest, is the notion of like Intel Clear Containers or Bonneville from VMware, that kind of stuff, giving more guarantees on isolation, things like that. I saw one tagline, I think it was on the Bonneville site, saying if you escape this guest, all you're going to get is the BIOS kind of thing, So I'm wondering, I'm sort of kind of curious about that. I don't know if you guys know more about that, but I think that's one angle, is with definitely seeing vendors like Intel and VMware kind of spinning up around containers. This is the future of security. Do you run a kind of a VM type container? Don't anyone thinks around that?
Yeah, so I'll speak up first, and then anyone else feel free to hop in. So just because our power systems folks have been playing in that area, this is one of the interesting things that's enabled by this move that, I won't go into all the OCI and Run C, but I think many of us understand what that is, and the fact that Docker, as of 1.11, the container executor is a separate binary coming out of the OCI runtime project. Once there's kind of the standardized set of commands on, start, stop, etc., then that becomes a pluggable resource. So at DockerCon, IBM had kind of an early morning breakfast time slot to talk about some things that we were up to, and one of our guys from IBM Böblingen Labs in Germany showed off a Run C binary for power that was using, hardware-based lightweight virtualization technology. And that we weren't the first to do that. As you said, Intel's been showing some of that off, and
I think Microsoft's going to ship it first, because there'll be Hyper-V isolation for Windows.
Exactly. So the Docker port of the daemon to Microsoft, that is, you can select Hyper-V isolation as well. So definitely, a lot of people are looking at that and playing that area. Interesting, I guess, in the sense of, does that mean we don't trust Linux kernel-based isolation, or it's just something that is just an added capability? I'll let others jump in there.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty interesting area. Definitely, we wanted to Docker kind of has as a mantra, batteries included but pluggable, and so the move to containerd plus run-c interface where you can plug in a different executor is really great, because we can kind of see a whole host of executors spin up that are responsible for containment. And so for folks who are interested in having that kind of like VM level isolation for whatever set of reasons makes them interested in doing that, that's fine. And this is just I guess it's a personal bias that has nothing to do with like Docker's official stance or anything like that. But when I look at an operating system like iOS, where Apple is offering upwards of $100,000 if you're able to escape their sandbox, to me that is an existence proof for secure operating systems, and that we don't need VM level isolations if we have a secure operating system. So to that end, I'm not ready to give up the ghost on Linux.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a kind of thing that Linux operating systems ought to be able to provide, and there's a lot of good work happening on securing the Linux kernel from Case Cook, and the folks on the kernel hardening mailing list are doing a bunch of stuff. The Chrome OS team is doing really good things. Android itself has a bunch of isolation features that they're adding to the Linux kernel, so I remain optimistic that the best solution is improving the Linux kernel, and I hope things go in that direction. But it's pluggable, and folks can plug in whatever they'd like to containerd. There's that. Justin, you have any thoughts in that area?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's kind of interesting. I think that there's also other things like SGX that's kind of interesting, which is a cryptographic isolation for processes inside that Intel's just shipping, and so I think there's kinds of interesting options for isolation, and we're looking at a bunch of stuff with around unikernels and things like that with them, and I think that a lot of it's going to be for specific things that people either have reasons for legal reasons where they have to isolate them and something's sufficient, or particularly high-value targets where things that contain cryptographic keys and so on, where you want particularly strong isolation. I suspect that general purpose computing is still going to take place on a general purpose OS for the near future.
Yep.
Yeah. Makes sense. So I think maybe we'll wrap up. This has been a great discussion. I'm really glad that each of you took time to join. Maybe a parting shot from each of you. I think we've hit it a few times, but in your opinion, I guess kind of as a closing comment, containerized applications, are they more secure or less secure than non-containerized applications? Maybe this is too softball, discussion, but it'd just be interesting to hear your thoughts in closing from each of you. So Daniel?
Yeah, so what I think is containers are definitely highlighting a lot more issues. Like I think Justin mentioned, and all of us kind of agreed around the stuff being brought to light. It's kind of always been there in terms of if you run, like, say, an application on root on bare metal, like that could be just more damaging, arguably, than using containers and things. I think it's definitely allows more variability, because now, like, the whole DevOps thing, a whole bunch of people have got access to more ways to trip themselves up, myself included. I've certainly been there. So I think for me, like the kind of parting shot I'll say is I'm really keen to see more education around this whole thing. The whole DevOps or DevSecOps, what we're calling it, I think is the next level for me, or one of the next levels with DevOps. I think like the whole DevOps thing really now is branching out to culture, to everything. And me, culture includes security, definitely all the non-functional aspects. So I'm really keen to see, see education kind of. I don't think implicitly or explicitly the containers are less or more secure. Like fundamentally, I think it's a kind of shared model right from the application down to the metal. But I think education is fundamental in understanding where we, as a developer, a sysadmin, a hardware manufacturer, whatever, where we should play our part. I think that's the biggest point for me.
Great. Justin?
I think the interesting security work now is happening in the container space, and so that's where that's why you get more security like that. I think that's where the vendors are targeting, the open source work is targeting. That's what the people who are really concerned about security, that's how they're deploying now. So I think it's there's a lot going on, and there's a real opportunity for people to make big improvements.
Right.
So the question is, like you said, a little bit of a softball. Absolutely think that apps running inside of containers are more secure. I might pop it up one level, say like, are containerized environments more secure than non-containerized environments? And I think in that sense, one of the things that's most exciting about this whole movement is the high expectations. So I don't know if I've ever seen a community demand security as much as they have within the container environment. And like Phil, I think you're the biggest receiver of some of this, in the sense that like everybody in the community wanted us to do user namespaces, and you did it. And so that kind of like set of high expectations around what should be there, what should be possible, was huge. And I think it's something that's unique to this community, and something that we should double down on. We should keep the expectations extremely high, because we've got a whole set of best practices that people understand, but haven't been engineered into platforms. And so as we look to continue working on containerized environments, building in those, responding to those high expectations will help us a lot. So thinking all the way from isolation to how do you deal with clusters of machines, how do you do cryptographic node identity, secrets management, the whole 9 yards. We should keep the expectations high for as long as possible, because this containerized environment seems to be what people are going to be using for the next decade or so, and so we should build a good thing for everybody to use.
Yep. All right, thanks everybody. That was definitely helpful, and thanks Nathan for getting up early, and for Daniel and Justin for staying late on a Friday afternoon, and look forward to chatting with you guys again, and thanks so much.
Thanks for
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.
All right, bye.